"Don't look at me," she whispered, bruised and barefoot, but the rancher fell to one knee and said, "Be my wife." The wind howled across the barren fields, carrying with it the scent of dust, sorrow, and something untold. She stood in the doorway of the broken cabin, her hair tangled, her skin bruised, her feet bare against the splintered wood. Her voice was fragile, trembling like a bird with a broken wing. "Don't look at me," she whispered, her eyes cast downward, ashamed of the shadows that had marked her body. But he did not turn away. The rancher, hardened by years of toil and sun, felt his knees weaken not from pity, but from something heavier, something unshakable. The sight of her wounds was not ugliness to him, it was a testament of survival. And as the fire of dusk painted her figure in shades of gold and crimson, he saw not disgrace, but dignity. He dropped to one knee, his weathered hands trembling as if holding the weight of her sorrow. "Be my wife," he said, voice steady, eyes locked on hers, daring her to believe. She flinched, a single tear breaking loose, carving its way down her dirt-streaked cheek. No man had ever looked at her without hunger or cruelty, yet here was one who looked as if her brokenness was holy. Her lips quivered, words caught in her throat like thorns. "You don't know what I've done. You don't know what they've done to me." His jaw tightened, but his gaze never faltered. "I don't need to know," he answered softly. "I see you, and I know you're still standing. That's all I need." His hand reached forward, not to claim, but to offer, a hand of steadiness, of soil and sweat, of roots and promise. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the floorboards, the splinters biting into her skin, but the pain meant nothing compared to the storm raging in her chest. For so long she had been told she was nothing, that she belonged in shadows, that her body was a burden and her soul a stain. Yet this man, this rancher who carried the scent of earth and rain, knelt before her as though she were something sacred. "I can't," she murmured, her hands covering her face. "You'll regret it. You'll see the scars. You'll hear the stories. You'll know I'm ruined." He leaned closer, his voice low but unshakable. "Then let the world call you ruined. Let them speak. I will not hear them. Because what I see, what I choose, is a woman who survived fire. And I will kneel before that fire every day if it means I walk through it with you." Her hand slipped from her face, revealing eyes that shimmered with disbelief. No man had ever spoken such words to her, words that did not demand, did not degrade, did not wound. Slowly, almost unwillingly, hope began to edge its way into the corners of her shattered heart. The silence between them deepened, heavy and alive. She could hear the beat of her own heart, uneven, unsteady, yet yearning for something beyond the pain. The rancher did not move, still kneeling, still waiting, as if time itself bent to the weight of his vow. Her lips parted, a whisper escaping before she could stop it. "Why me?" He smiled faintly, a tired but unwavering smile. "Because when I look at you, I don't see the bruises. I don't see the shame. I see the woman who stood when others would have fallen. And I see the life we could build, one where you'll never have to whisper those words again." Her chest rose and fell, ragged, uncertain. She wanted to run, to hide, to shield him from the ruin she carried. Yet his words pressed against her heart like balm on an open wound. She searched his face for deceit, for weakness, but all she found was a man steady as the earth beneath them. The night deepened, stars trembling awake across the vast sky, and in that silence, she felt something stir within her, a fragile, aching desire to believe, to let herself be seen, to let herself be loved, not for what the world had taken from her, but for what still remained. She lifted her hand, hesitant, trembling, and placed it in his. His rough palm closed around hers, warm and unyielding, and for the first time in years, she did not feel broken. She felt chosen. The stars grew brighter as if the heavens themselves were listening, watching this fragile exchange between a broken woman and a man who refused to see her as anything less than whole. His hand was rough against hers, scarred from years of labor, but it was warm, steady, and real. She could feel the rhythm of his pulse beneath her fingertips, strong and unwavering, unlike the chaos in her own chest. For a long time, she said nothing, afraid that the moment might collapse if she breathed too deeply, afraid that his words were just a dream spun by the night air. He waited. The rancher was a man of patience, a man who knew the value of silence and the weight of words. He did not rush her. He did not tighten his grip. though every part of him longed to pull her into his arms. Instead, he remained still, his knee pressed against the wooden floorboards, his gaze locked onto hers as though he were anchoring her in place. Her lips parted, then closed again. She wanted to speak, to tell him to leave, to push him away before he discovered the depths of her scars, but her heart betrayed her. It beat louder, harder, as though something within it had already chosen for her. She pulled her hand back suddenly, clutching it against her chest as though burned. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice quivering. "You think I'm someone you can save, but I'm not. I'm ruined. I'm nothing." His breath caught, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly rose from his knee, towering above her but not in a way that threatened. He bent down, so his face was level with hers, his eyes unwavering. "You are not nothing," he said firmly. "And you're not ruined. They tried to break you, but you're still here. That doesn't make you ruined. It makes you stronger than anyone I've ever known." Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she turned her face away, unwilling to let him see her weakness, but he gently cupped her chin, turning her back to him. "Look at me," he said softly, though the command carried weight. She resisted for a moment, then finally lifted her gaze. The rawness of his eyes startled her. There was no pity there, no false sympathy, only a fierce tenderness that cut through her defenses like a blade through cloth. "I don't deserve this," she choked out. "I don't deserve you." "Maybe not," he said without hesitation, and for a moment her heart clenched at the bluntness of it. But then he added, "And I don't deserve you either." That's not how love works. It's not about who deserves who. It's about choosing. And I choose you. The words struck her like thunder, echoing inside her chest until her whole body trembled. She wanted to believe him, wanted to throw herself into his arms and let the world fall away, but fear clawed at her. Fear of being hurt again, fear of being abandoned, fear that if he truly saw her scars, inside and out, he would turn away like all the others. He seemed to sense her hesitation. Slowly, he reached for her hand again, this time lifting it gently to his lips. His beard brushed against her skin, rough but tender, and she felt warmth spread through her veins. "Let me carry some of this with you," he murmured against her knuckles. "You've carried it alone for too long." Her chest heaved, and the sob she had been holding back finally escaped. It came out raw, unrestrained, tearing through the silence of the night. She crumpled against him, her body collapsing under the weight of her pain. Without hesitation, his arms wrapped around her, strong and unyielding, holding her together when she felt like falling apart. She buried her face in his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt, and he held her as if nothing else in the world mattered. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be held. Allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was not beyond redemption. He said nothing as she cried, just held her tighter, his hand stroking her tangled hair, his steady breath against the crown of her head grounding her in the storm. When her sobs finally began to quiet, he whispered, "You're safe now. You hear me, safe." The word felt foreign to her, almost impossible. Safe. Could such a thing exist for someone like her? Yet in his arms, beneath the endless sky, she almost believed it. They stayed that way for what felt like hours, until the chill of night seeped into her skin and the weight of exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. He lifted her easily, cradling her as though she weighed nothing, and carried her away from the broken doorway into the dim warmth of the ranch house. She protested weakly, embarrassed by her weakness, but he silenced her with a simple, "You don't have to be strong tonight." He laid her gently on the couch, covering her with a wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. She curled into it, her body trembling still, but less from fear and more from the strange comfort that wrapped around her. He crouched beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Rest," he whispered. "Tomorrow will be different." Her eyes fluttered, heavy with sleep, but her voice was barely audible as she whispered back, "What if I can't change? What if I'm too broken?" His reply was steady, like the earth itself speaking. "Then we'll change together. And if you break, I'll hold the pieces until you're ready to put them back." The promise echoed through her as her body surrendered to exhaustion. Sleep pulled her under, but for the first time in years, her dreams were not filled with shadows, they were filled with light. When dawn broke, the ranch came alive with the sounds of morning, the lowing of cattle, the caw of distant crows, the creak of the windmill turning in the early breeze. She stirred on the couch, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. For a moment, confusion gripped her. Where was she? Then the memories of the night before returned, and with them came a mixture of fear and something softer. Hope. The rancher was already up, his silhouette visible through the open doorway as he moved about the yard, feeding the horses, checking the fences. His movements were steady, purposeful, like a man who had lived his entire life in rhythm with the land. She watched him for a moment, her chest tightening. He had offered her everything, his name, his home, his heart, and yet she still felt unworthy. Quietly, she slipped outside, her bare feet brushing against the cool grass. He noticed her immediately, setting down the bucket he carried. His eyes softened when they met hers. "Morning," he said, his voice low and warm. She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter around her. I should go," she murmured, her eyes darting toward the horizon. "You've already done too much for me." He wiped his hands on his jeans, then stepped closer. "You can go if you want," he said calmly. "I won't stop you. But know this, you have a place here. A place with me, and you don't have to run anymore." Her throat tightened. The freedom in his words both comforted and terrified her. He wasn't trapping her, wasn't demanding she stay. He was giving her a choice. Something no one else had ever given her. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just a rancher but a man who had chosen to kneel when the world would have stood in judgment. A man who saw her not as ruined but as worthy of love. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could learn to see herself the same way. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I don't know if I can be what you want me to be." His answer was simple, unwavering. "I don't want you to be anything but yourself. That's all I ask." Tears stung her eyes again, but this time they weren't only born of sorrow. They carried something brighter, something fragile but alive. She stepped forward, her hand reaching for his, and when he closed his fingers around hers, she felt the ground beneath her steady for the first time in years. And though the road ahead would not be easy, though the scars of her past would not vanish overnight, in that moment, beneath the rising sun and the endless sky, she knew she was no longer walking it alone. The morning light stretched long across the ranch, gilding the fences, the barn, and the weary earth with a softness that felt almost sacred. She stood there, her hand in his, and though the world remained vast and uncertain, the warmth of his grip made it feel smaller, safer. For a long time neither of them spoke, content to let silence hold what words could not. Her eyes flickered toward the hills, toward the open world that promised escape but also threatened loneliness. For years, her instinct had been to run, always running from pain, from memory, from herself. But here, in the quiet of dawn, with his hand anchoring hers, she realized she didn't feel the urge to flee. Instead, she felt the faint, trembling desire to stay. He studied her face, reading every shift of doubt and longing that crossed her features. He knew this was fragile ground, that trust was not something she could simply give overnight. So he didn't push. Instead, he led her gently toward the corral, where the horses were stirring. The scent of hay and leather lingered in the air, grounding, real. "Ever ridden?" he asked softly. She shook her head, eyes darting nervously to the animals. Their size unsettled her, their raw strength a reminder of how powerless she often felt. But his presence steadied her, and when he extended his hand toward one of the mares, she watched carefully, noting how even the horse seemed to calm beneath his touch. "Would you like to?" His voice carried no pressure, only an invitation. Her lips parted, then closed. A battle waged inside her, fear against the faint spark of courage his words stirred. Finally, almost inaudibly, she whispered, "Maybe." He smiled, not wide, but enough to soften the lines of his sun-worn face. "Then maybe is enough for today." He guided her to the fence, helping her climb up so she could sit safely above the corral. From there, she watched as he saddled the horse with practiced ease, his movements sure and measured. He spoke to the animal in low tones, the kind of voice one might use with a frightened child. She realized he wasn't just a man of the land. He was a man who knew how to listen to the unspoken, to the silent language of fear. When he mounted the horse, the sight struck her. He sat tall, as if the saddle was an extension of himself, as if man and beast were bound by trust. He guided the mare in slow circles, letting her watch, showing her that control didn't have to mean cruelty, that strength could be gentle. She felt something stir in her chest. If he could tame something so powerful without breaking it, perhaps he could hold her the same way. When he dismounted and returned to her side, she found her voice trembling but brave. "Could I try?" His eyes softened with pride, though he masked it with quiet composure. Of course. He helped her down from the fence, his hand never leaving hers. When she neared the mare, her breath caught, fear clawing at her throat. The horse's massive body loomed over her, and instinct screamed to step back. But his hand pressed gently against the small of her back. "She won't hurt you. She knows you're afraid, but she won't take advantage of it. Animals are honest that way." She swallowed, nodding, though every muscle in her body was taut. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out her hand. The mare sniffed her palm, warm breath brushing against her skin. Her heart pounded, but the horse didn't shy away. Instead, it leaned in slightly, trusting her. Tears burned her eyes. To be trusted, it was a gift she hadn't expected to feel again. He guided her foot into the stirrup, lifting her gently into the saddle. She clutched the reins too tightly, panic threatening to overtake her, but his voice steadied her. "Breathe. The horse feels what you feel. Trust her, and she'll trust you." Her breaths came shallow at first, then steadier. She loosened her grip, allowing the mare to shift beneath her. The rhythm of the animal's movement was foreign but oddly soothing, like being carried by something larger than herself. And for the first time in years, she felt lifted, off the ground, out of the shadows, closer to the sky. He walked beside her, one hand lightly on the reins, never letting go, never letting her feel alone. With every step the mare took, the terror ebbed and something new took its place, the fragile, wondrous sensation of freedom. When she finally dismounted, her legs shook, but a laugh, small, disbelieving, escaped her lips. He caught it, that sound, and treasured it like a rare gem. "See," he said quietly, "you're braver than you think." She looked at him, truly looked, and felt her heart shift. He wasn't trying to fix her. He was simply standing with her, steady and unmovable, until she found her own strength. That night, as they sat on the porch, the world around them dipped into twilight. The sky was a canvas of fire and shadow, the kind of beauty that hurt to look at too long. She wrapped herself in the blanket he'd given her, watching the horizon, her thoughts heavy but no longer suffocating. "You work so hard," she murmured, her eyes following his movements as he lit the lantern. "Why?" He paused, considering her question. "Because the land demands it. Because life out here doesn't give anything for free. And because..." His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. "Because when you build something with your hands, it lasts. It becomes a part of you." She lowered her eyes, her voice barely audible. "I've never built anything, only..." Flinching. "Because when you build something with your hands, it lasts. It becomes a part of you." She lowered her eyes, her voice barely audible. "I've never built anything, only lost." "Then maybe it's time to start building," he said softly. "And maybe we build it together." Her throat tightened. The idea terrified her, but it also pulled at her like the tide. Could she really create something that lasted? Something not stained by the past? She didn't answer, but he didn't press. He simply sat beside her, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. Days passed, and each one drew them closer. She helped him with small tasks, feeding the chickens, carrying water, mending torn fabric. At first her hands trembled, clumsy and uncertain, but under his guidance, she grew steadier. He never scolded, never mocked, only encouraged. Every success, no matter how small, was met with a nod of quiet approval that made her chest swell with something dangerously close to pride. At night, they shared stories by the fire. His words painted images of long days under the sun, of storms that had nearly destroyed the ranch, of dreams he had buried and others he still carried. She listened, sometimes adding fragments of her own past, though the darker pieces stayed locked away. Still, he never demanded more than she could give. One evening, as the fire crackled low, she asked, "Why me? Out of all the women you could choose, why someone like me?" He leaned back, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Because you see the world differently. You've been through fire, and you survived. Most people walk through life untouched, untested. But you carry storms inside you, and yet here you are, still standing." That kind of strength draws me. Not the strength that shouts, but the strength that whispers. Her chest ached at his words, and tears threatened again. She turned away, afraid of letting him see, but he reached out, his hand covering hers. "Don't hide from me," he murmured. "Not you, not here." She squeezed his hand back, trembling but unwilling to let go. The nights grew colder as autumn deepened, and she found herself lingering closer to him, drawn not just by warmth but by the safety he carried. Each small gesture, his hand brushing hers when passing tools, the quiet way he made sure her blanket was tucked in, the patience in his eyes, wove threads of trust that stitched themselves into her heart. But trust was fragile, and shadows lingered. One night, a storm broke over the ranch, thunder rattling the windows, lightning slicing the sky. She woke in the dark, her body trembling, memories crashing through her like waves. She curled on the couch, hands over her ears, whispering, "Don't look at me," into the shadows, as if the storm itself was the enemy. He found her there, shaking, eyes wide. He didn't speak at first, only wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. His voice was steady, low, like a hymn. "It's just a storm, nothing more. It can't touch you here." She clung to him, sobbing, her fear spilling out unchecked. And he held her until the thunder faded, until the first light of dawn crept through the windows. When her tears finally slowed, she whispered, broken, "I don't know if I'll ever stop being afraid." He kissed the top of her head, his lips lingering there. "Then I'll sit with you through every storm until you do." Her heart shattered at the promise, not from pain but from the unbearable weight of his devotion. And for the first time, she dared to imagine a life not defined by scars but by the man who saw beyond them. As winter crept closer, their bond deepened, forged by work, by silence, by storms weathered together. And though she still whispered, "Don't look at me," in moments of weakness, he always answered with the same vow, spoken with the certainty of the earth itself, "Be my wife." And each time, her answer grew closer, closer, until it trembled on the edge of her lips, waiting for the moment when her heart was ready to finally believe she was worthy of the life he offered. The days shortened, and the ranch slipped into winter's grip. Snow dusted the hills, clinging to the pines, and the air sharpened with the kind of cold that made the lungs ache. The nights grew long, but inside the small ranch house, warmth lingered between them, fires burning in the hearth, soft conversations that stretched until dawn, silences that spoke louder than words. She had found a rhythm there, fragile yet steady. Each morning, she rose before the sun to help with chores. Her hands, once hesitant, grew sure. She fed the chickens, fetched water, and learned how to saddle a horse without trembling. Each task was small, ordinary, but together they became something more, proof that she was no longer the woman who whispered, "Don't look at me," in shame. She was someone rebuilding, but the shadows still lingered. There were nights when she woke sweating, heart pounding from dreams of voices that cursed her, hands that hurt her. She would curl in on herself, afraid the past had followed her into the safety of the ranch. And always, without fail, he was there. Sometimes he held her in silence, his presence enough to steady her. Other times he whispered the same words, over and over, like a prayer, "You're safe. You're safe with me." Each time he said it, she believed him a little more. One morning, after a storm had buried the fields in a blanket of white, he led her outside to where the world lay untouched. The air was so still she could hear her own breath. He stopped at the fence line and turned to her, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked. She shook her head, clutching the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I see a woman who was told she was nothing, but who's standing in front of me, stronger than she knows. I see someone who believes she's broken, but who's taught me more about courage than any battle I've fought with this land. I see the future I've been waiting for." His voice caught, just slightly, and he dropped to one knee in the snow, his hand reaching for hers. "I asked you once, I'll ask again. Be my wife." Her breath stopped. The words hung in the air, heavier than the sky, piercing deeper than any wound she had carried. She stared at him, her heart thundering in her chest, torn between the woman who still carried scars and the woman who wanted to believe she was worthy of this love. Her lips parted, trembling. "I'm afraid," she whispered. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "So am I. but I'd rather be afraid with you than brave without you. Tears welled, spilling hot against the cold air. For so long, she had believed love was something cruel, something that chained and destroyed. But here was a man who knelt in the snow, not demanding, not taking, but offering. A man who had seen her bruises, her fears, her nights of trembling, and still said, I choose you. Her knees buckled, and she sank down before him, her hands clutching his as if they were the only steady thing in the world. Her voice broke, but the words came clear, carried by every scar, every survival, every breath she had left. Yes, she whispered, yes, I'll be your wife. The rancher closed his eyes, relief flooding his features as though he had been holding his breath for a lifetime. When he opened them again, the fire there burned brighter than the rising sun. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her from the snow, and held her as though she were treasure reclaimed from ruin. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a shadow. She didn't feel like nothing. She felt chosen, cherished, alive. The days that followed were not without struggle. There were moments she doubted, moments the old whispers tried to creep back into her mind. But now there was a voice louder than the lies, a hand that always reached for hers, a love that stood unyielding. Together they worked the land, mended fences, endured storms. Together they built something lasting. And every night, when the world grew quiet and she lay beside him beneath the weight of the stars, she no longer whispered, "Don't look at me." Instead, she let his gaze rest upon her without shame, knowing that he saw not the ruin of her past, but the woman she had become. In the end, she realized something she had never dared believe. Love was not about being unscarred. It was about being seen, fully, fiercely, and still being chosen. And in that choice, his and hers alike, she found her redemption, her home, her forever. Thank you so much for being here and watching this story till the end. If it touched your heart, please give it a like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share it with your friends so they can feel the power of the story too. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because even greater stories are waiting for you. Your support means everything. See you in the next video.